Today, in this episode, we will delve into what is anxiety, what is generalized anxiety, what are different phobias, how is normal anxiety different from severe anxiety, and especially this anxiety in children and teenagers. I'm a mom, and I have a lot of friends who are moms. I have a lot of students who are moms, and we moms talk to each other. And one thing that is absolutely clear that all our children, whether they're teenagers or they're even in their early 20s, they're kind of anxious and they do not have appropriate social skills for their age that we did have. Have we ourselves created a world where they do not want to deal with responsibility and are constantly anxious? Today we are talking to Mithun Baliga about anxiety. Quick disclaimer, this is not a medical podcast. We are just talking about a general viewpoint. Anxiety has become very common amongst teenagers, especially post COVID, and it's almost like an epidemic level.
Yes, this is a very important and interesting topic, right? It's become very, very common, like very common nowadays among teenagers, especially post COVID, all the isolation and disconnect from their social circles. This is happening to adults too. And I think now, 5 years out, we are seeing the full blown picture of all the long term things that have happened due to COVID. But anyway, the good side is we all survived. So we just have to now pick up the pieces and move on. And it's not easy. So this has been particularly hard for teenagers. And if you think about it, some of them have now may have become young adults. My son, he's turned 20. So is he a teenager? No. But is he an adult? No. you know, technically after 18, you're like, oh yeah, you're an adult. But guess what? Their brains haven't fully grown and developed and made all those connections till they're at least 21, at least. And sometimes even later, it takes about 24 sometimes. And if you think back to our own 24, we were pretty much dealing with the world as adults, I think.
So just because a child has turned 18 doesn't mean they're ready to take any responsibility. They're still a child. And like you said, their brain isn't fully grown and developed. It also differs in both genders.
Yes, the brain isn't fully grown and developed. So 18 by no means is an adult. Although for legal reasons, you have to pick an age, right? So they have to pick a number. So therefore, 18 has been picked. Young adults is probably a better way, like between teenage years and reaching adulthood. And I'm kind of including those kids too, like who are in their early 20s.
Compared to how we were at that age, this particular generation seem younger in terms of what they're doing with their lives and how they are reacting to the world around them.
Yes, you're right, Manjulali. They seem younger than than what we thought one would be for that age. I think that they do not have enough social skills because they have the social media. So they are unable to deal with a group of people in the same room with different personalities because they just don't know how to do that. Right?
Hang on a second. Hang on a second. You said you do not think that teenagers have enough social skills and they don't know how to react to the world around them because they have social media. So, social media is preventing them from learning social skills physically. So, they don't know how to socialize. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, they think they're still interacting on their phone, but it's so much more complex. They don't understand body language, they don't understand social cues unless they're actually making an effort.
Wow, that's crazy. And we will unpack that more. But for now, let's get into anxiety. How does anxiety work? How does it disrupt? And what are the consequences?
Anxiety is normal. Anxiety is not a medical term or a name of a disease. Anxiety is a normal English word, right? Anxious. That's a regular word. Most of us feel what is called normal anxiety. Like, can you give examples of when normally one may be anxious?
Like before an exam or a test or an event?
Yeah, before an exam or a test, right? That's normal. What happens before that event? Before the test or before the exam, what do you feel? You feel palms sweating, heart racing, worrying. nervous, butterflies in your stomach. And these are all like very long standing descriptions prove that anxiety is not a new thing. This is anxiety that you will feel before an exam, before you have to address a group of people, or before you go into a big meeting or like a major personal or family conversation. So many things. That is normal. But then what happens after that? Like you've done your exam, you've done well, you finished your meeting, it went okay. You feel a sense of relief. I'm like, maybe the next exam, yes, you'll do it all over again. And that's normal too, right? So there is a pre-event anxiety. There is an event that happens, and then there is some kind of release after. So that cycle is normal. So that's something I think we should all kind of reflect on a little bit, as long as the cycle is maintained.
Yeah, but in a case of a teenager, let's say who's in a high school, and high school in the US pile up hours and hours of homework every single day. The students of high schools or college sometimes, they have that pre-event anxiety of homework, of passing exams, that pre-event anxiety every single day. So there is no time for release. So that cycle doesn't get maintained. But the schools, the teachers, and even the parents will just tell the kids. Even I went to a school, it's just normal to feel anxiety before a test, but they don't understand that there is no release. So they're not understanding the kind of mind cycle that these children are in.
Yeah, everybody feels anxious before a test or something like that. It kind of minimizes what they're feeling, and it kind of brings that distance. So they immediately will feel this person doesn't understand what I'm going through. Till you know the full extent of what that teen is going through, jumping to this by saying that that's perfectly normal, which it may be normal, but it brings about a distance. And after that, they shut down and they won't talk to you further because they've already labeled you as like, you don't understand.
Yeah, I come from India, and we didn't have to deal with all that. We had very, very strict Asian upbringing. I went through this with my own teenager where my teenager shut down because I was labeled as someone who did not understand the anxiety and the problems. And the truth is, I did not understand it. And after that, I made it a point to try and understand what is happening. Then I had to handle the child with kid gloves. I was walking on eggshells.
Walking on eggshells, perfectly right. Teenagers, you have to handle them with kid gloves. So you never know which way they're going to go. So you say something and then they interpret it as something else. So you have to be very, very careful, and especially when they have anxiety.
So really, what you're saying is there's normal anxiety and then there's the severe anxiety.
Sometimes halfway through the conversation, we are trying to normalize it. So sometimes that backfires. That normal so called anxiety that we're feeling is not what we're talking about. Anxiety is a very general term, and it's used to describe a feeling of extreme worry or unease. So extreme, right? And it's not one disorder. I feel anxious. It's not that one. It's a group of disorders. Okay, it's an umbrella term, and there's a lot of different kinds of anxiety disorders that go underneath this umbrella, right? So it's characterized by significant impairing, meaning it impairs you. Like if you have this big exam or test that you have to take, and you're anxious, you go there and you still take it. That's not what we're talking about. This anxiety that stops you from even completing the exam or prevents you from even entering the room where the test or exam is taking place or things like that, right? And that anxiety is either out of proportion to the threat, or sometimes that anxiety has no cause. So that is something else. That's called generalized anxiety disorder. So generalized anxiety disorder is A type that comes under this umbrella, and this is one of the very common disorders. Okay, generalized anxiety, panic disorders. I'm sure we've all heard of panic disorder. That comes under, again, the anxiety disorders group umbrella, right? So that's panic disorder is actually different from generalized anxiety disorder. OCD, right? Obsessive compulsive disorder is actually a type of anxiety disorder. Selective mutism, because suddenly sometimes people will not talk, right? Social anxiety.
I was wondering, anxiety is different than depression, and there's generalized anxiety, there's normal anxiety, but aren't the drugs that are being given for anxiety the same as for depression?
Yes, we're now talking about severe anxiety, because the danger of this is if you have a teen who's actually having severe anxiety, not the normal anxiety, always listen. I think let them say, because That way you can then gauge in your head if you listen. When you look from Western medicine, a pharmaceutical approach, many times the medications they use for anxiety and depression are kind of the same drug. Sometimes these can go hand in hand, and sometimes the medication that takes care of one also takes care of the other because it's working at that chemical level.
When your child goes off to college or boarding school, and they talk a lot about the empty nest syndrome and how bad is it for parents, or especially moms, we have the empty nest syndrome. But children and teenagers who've gone off to college or even living by themselves in the early 20s, they also feel separation anxiety. Except, of course, they're also excited to be away from parents and be independent for the first time. But hidden under all that is a little bit of separation as well. At least that's what I think. They'll never admit it.
Yes, separation anxiety. Usually, the typical separation anxiety is when we talk in terms of milestones of development in children. So, there is a certain age, like when they're going into toddlerhood, right? They have this separation anxiety. They do not want to be separated from their primary caregiver. It could be the mom, it could be the dad, it could be grandma, whoever it is. So, when they're separated from their primary caregiver, they get very, very anxious. And that's normal development. So, a baby in its development should feel that at a certain age. So that separation, so it's not a disorder as part of development. That means that baby has recognized the primary caregiver, understands that this person is taking care of me, is looking out for me. And when I'm separated from this person, I'm not comfortable, right? I don't feel safe. And that means this baby's brain has put all these things together. So that's a sign of development, right? So we look forward to that when when you take the baby for their visit to the pediatrician. That's a good sign. Okay, so like I said, everything at a certain stage in life, most of these things are actually normal. They should happen. Problems come when they happen at the wrong time or when they're happening above and beyond what's normal, right?
Can you talk to me about phobias and different types of fears that children may have?
So specific phobias like fear of heights, so these are something else, like fear of snakes, fear of spiders, needles, a fear of clowns. Well, these are very specific phobias. And many times, and this came as a surprise to me, you develop phobias later in life. Has anybody experienced that, or is it just me?
I mean, after moving from India to US about 20 years ago, I have different kind of fears here in the US that I had in India. Well, I was driving in India for 20 years and I had no fear of driving. And, driving in India is horrible. And then when I moved here, I have developed a fear of driving, especially driving on the freeway.
Yep. If you were never scared of heights, and then suddenly you hit a certain age, but suddenly a person develops fear of heights. Till then, they were perfectly fine. In my 20s, 30s, nothing. And then suddenly in your 40s, you develop fear of something. We are more complex individuals. So these are all anxiety disorders. So in teenagers, now, why is it so different in teenagers?
Because of the atmosphere of fear and the social media and everything's either right wing or left wing in the whole society. They just don't want to deal with it as well. Point I want to make it. Another point I want to make is driving. Teenagers do not want to drive. 50% of the moms I talk to, their kids have not learned to drive, or if they have learned to drive, they're not actually actively driving. And these are people in the early 20s. I remember when we were kids, we were driving 8, 16, 17, so on.
Yep. When they have to start driving, some of them don't even think twice about it, right? They just want to go. They just want to get independent and mobile on their own. They just jump on it. But I'm noticing more and more kids nowadays are very hesitant to start driving to start with. In this country, it stops you from doing anything, right? Without being able to drive. Yes, in teenagers, this is the thing because the school is their environment, their peer group is so important, and there's so much social pressure, right? And keep in mind, they're still growing. So the growth and development has not completed. And this is the critical time where all these puberty related changes are happening too. So they're very, very vulnerable emotionally anyway. And they have always been vulnerable across the generation. any generation. This is a very dicey time period to go through for anybody, right? But because it's like a make or break time. So the influences that they have, the pressures that they have, everything is contributing. So for a young kid, like maybe somebody who's 5 years old, their sources of anxiety are like fear of the dark, a monster under the bed, bugs and insects. Usually around the age of 7 is when they understand the concept of somebody dying, and that means they won't come back. Once they understand that at that age, they start having this anxiety that something may happen to my parents or to me, and that anxiety comes, and that's like again quite normal. But it comes and goes. But if they start holding on to it, that's a different thing. So again, those are normal anxieties that come at certain ages.
I also want to talk about parenting styles. In America, they mollycoddle their kids and they praise the kids constantly. Oh, buddy, you just did great. The child is failing an exam and they're still saying you did great. C is great. You did good. Sports are more important. Suddenly, the kid reaches high school and then they get on the kid's case saying, no, you have to get good scores. You have to go in a good college. And so it's such a different environment as far as culturally goes. Asian cultures, Latin American cultures, if there's a child, they refuse to have their vegetables. They refuse. Instead of giving them a cookie or just, giving them some nonsense, just say, fine, if you're not going to do it, just have breakfast tomorrow. Go hungry then. They would never even think of something like that here. Another thing I want to talk about the cultural differences in Eastern cultures, we talk to our children about death and or when the children become curious about death here, and maybe it's the effect of Christianity, it's very whitewashed. But in Hindu culture, Vedic culture, we talk about death. And of course, some kids have morbid fascination with it, others don't. We'll continue the second part of this podcast next week. Hope you enjoyed it.